Thanks to everybody for coming and watching, everybody that's watching in. I really love this webinar, if that's what, is that the right word? I think it is, to be very interactive. So the more we help you, the better it's going to be. The more information that we can actually give to you directly, and the more technical help that Steve can give, the more productive this will be. There's pointless, I want this whole thing to work like a river. It should flow in any direction. And it's basically us trying to teach you what we've picked up over the last few years, or in my case, over the last millennium, just to help people improve their filmmaking skills, because I really do seriously believe that the game has changed enormously. It changed with Vincent Laforet doing that movie, Reverie. He kicked the whole ball off. He had a couple of Canon 5Ds and he made a movie which was really quite spectacular, and I think it blew away everybody as to what you could achieve just using a DSLR. And before that, it was really a very expensive proposition making a movie. You really needed to rent very expensive equipment, very expensive lenses. And to be quite honest, I think that there was a famous saying from Hitchcock, which is, there's only three important things about a film, and that is script, script, and script. The rest actually doesn't matter too much. It's an exaggeration, but if you have a great script and a great idea and great actors, you can basically shoot a film on gaffer tape and it'll be kind of okay. Given that premise, I really do believe that you can use the 5D, the 7D, the 1D Mark IV, or whichever DSLR you prefer, to actually make a movie that will stand up to examination on a large screen. And it doesn't matter if it's slightly grainy, it doesn't matter if there are beats where it's out of focus. If the story's great and it's from the heart and it's something you wanted to do, just go and do it. And so we're basically here all about that, because what this has done, what Canon gifted us with, by accident by the way, because I'm sure everybody here knows, or should know, that this whole video capture on the DSLRs was really a request from photojournalists that did, photographs of celebrities, and then they thought, hey, it would be so cool to be able to shoot a little web piece to put on the internet and things like that. So Canon responded to that request by, giving them, compressed video. But lo and behold, Vincent went and proved that you could do something extremely special with it. And then I picked up the baton much later than a lot of other people, and ended up shooting an entire, at the time, the most popular network television show on earth, with a camera that cost $2,500. And okay, we had a whole bunch of accessories and so on and so forth, but in principle, the fact is that suddenly the whole film industry has become democratized because of this device that Canon have gifted to the world. And what would you like to add to that, Stephen? I mean, it's an incredible device and it enables people, and I think that's wonderful, because now, especially given the outlets of, like Vimeo and YouTube, and there's one I just saw the other day called Third Reel, which is really almost like a venue for filmmakers to show movies they've made. And there's some amazing stuff on there that's been shot on the 5D or 7D. And it's beautiful, and it's just a matter of being smart and storyboarding. And, so that's basically why we're here, is to help people sort of understand the process, what you can do with these cameras and how it's basically changed the world. I mean, we call it the 5D revolution, or the HD DSLR revolution. And,
you can basically make a film for like under $500 without owning anything. You could just go to the shop and you could, any rental shop would rent a 5D. I think we priced it out. It was $500 and it was a 5D Mark II, 70 to 200 IS, 16 to 35, 24 to 70, Sockler tripod, which was a fluid head, Red Rock rig, and I think there was a couple like miscellaneous things like batteries and stuff like that. And that was all under $500. And if you were a student, it was half of that. And then where we're from, back in California, at Sammy's, if you take it out on Friday, you don't have to return it till Monday. So if you had all your stuff written out, you could make commercials, you could do anything in 3 days. So, and they're small enough too, and they're not like obtrusive. You can do a lot of like guerrilla stuff with them. You get on buses, you kind of do all, not that we're condoning all that, but you could. He's a little bit more commercial. I guess I can kind of do whatever. So.
Steve, can I ask you a question? If you were to rent one of those lenses, Ken and Chick would like to know, I mean, you said the 16, what did you say, 16
to 35.
35, the 70 to 200, and the 24 to 70?
Just one of them?
If you had to pick one lens, what would it be?
It'd probably be the 24 to 70.
Okay.
Just because it's kind of like in the middle. You can kind of back up from the 24,
right.
You can kind of get closer from the 70. So I think that would be like more of a neutral, because you couldn't just have a 16 to 35, that would be way too wide.
No, absolutely, I agree. Or a 24 to 105.
Yeah,
Okay.
or the 24 to 105.
Okay.
The 24 to 105 is just slightly sharper, what I've noticed too, because the 24 to 70 is an older build. So it just seems that the glass is a little bit sharper. You do lose your aperture though, because it's an f4, not a 2.8.
But technically, you could make an entire movie on a 24 to 105. You don't have to be fancy. That's the whole point. If the story's strong enough, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. You can get in close on the 24 if you want one effect, or you can back off on the 105 on the other end, and it'll give you a completely different perspective. And so you have all the tools in one lens. Of course, it's lovely to have a crane, and it's lovely to have big lights and all of that stuff, but you actually don't need it. There's a lot of problems that one encounters with these cameras. You have to work kind of quite hard to make them work. But it's still worth it, because it enables you to do amazing things with very, very little. And I think that's the exciting thing.
Well, there's a lot of groups that start up too. There's like the LA Final Cut user group, and then there's the DMA, which is all the Adobe and like After Effects, and then there's like hundreds of people like all over Craigslist, and they always want to do like projects because the cameras are so reasonable to buy. There's so many people out there with them that like you could always find someone. If you put out an ad in Craigslist, like, hey, we're looking for an After Effects guy, or hey, we're looking for a post guy, or hey, we need a second camera for our film, like usually you'll get a response. Like I don't think I've ever not got a response in Craigslist. And everybody just wants like stuff for their reel. And then you meet people and someone's better than you, or you're better than them, and like you kind of just like build a team. That was actually my hardest thing, is because like I always wanted to do everything myself. And I was like, nah, it's cool, we're good. That's why I kind of learned everything. And then it's kind of a hard transition, because like, get OCD about stuff, and you're like, it's not right, it's not right. And then you kind of go, but yeah, I mean, you can really make anything with them.
I mean, and the thing is too that, I mean, in the case of House, we don't use them because they only cost $2,500. I mean, we can afford slightly more than that. Each of our episodes cost millions of dollars, and so the way
$1,000 a minute.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. Just if we divide our production cost by the amount of time we spend shooting, it's a fortune. It's a lot of money, and all TV shows are like that, because we have a crew of hundreds. We have a massive amount of real estate at Fox Studios, which is permanently ours. Huge electrical bills. I mean, massive production staff, post-production staff. I mean, I don't know, the crew list is kind of like the yellow pages on our shoot. It's unbelievable. So, the last thing in the world we were trying to do was to save money by using the 5D. What I was looking for and how this all came about was, I used to do a lot of commercials, and before I went on to House, I did, actually it was during one of the breaks on House, I did a commercial for Japan, because the Rebel camera in Japan is called the Kiss for some strange reason. It's called the Kiss. The client from Canon obviously said, well, would you consider shooting this commercial on the 5D? And I thought he'd been smoking something. And I thought, the guy must be completely off his rocker, because, I mean, how could you possibly shoot a movie? And this was actually after Reverie and all of that, but I hadn't really been following that very much, because that was very much a 35mm, big cameras and $100,000 zooms and cranes and, big lights and, big DP and all of that stuff. And so got to do the commercial, and then I thought, well, maybe I should take a look at this thing. And I started playing with it, and then I realized that, my goodness, the image quality is actually not too bad, and for television, it's certainly kind of acceptable. It's there's a few problems here and there, because I set out to punish the camera a bit to try and find out what I could find was wrong with it. And, I'm sure everyone here knows that there are certain weaknesses, but there are with any camera you buy. There's a weakness with an IMAX, it weighs 500 pounds. So there is no perfect camera. And so it's horses for courses. And you use a camera which works for a particular situation, and then you can achieve incredible results. And if you use the right camera for the right situation, you can do things like save a huge amount of time, or capture moments that were otherwise very, very difficult to capture. You can be very surreptitious using DSLR cameras. The actors almost never knew we were on the set when we ended up shooting. At first they thought they were surrounded by paparazzi and they were really sort of put off, but after a couple of days it was kind of rather wonderful not to have this huge black thing in front of your face, And it was just somebody like, on a monopod with a, and so it was kind of really, anyway, I diverged. I ended up shooting the Canon Kiss commercial on the 5D, and it really looked quite beautiful. Commercials are kind of a bit easier because obviously you don't have long running shots, so you don't run into the 12-minute problem. And also, generally, shots tend to be a lot more static, so it wasn't such a big issue for the focus, which is difficult on the 7D and 5D and all the various cameras. Focus is really tricky, and that's one thing we can't deny. It really is tricky. You have to have, I'm very lucky, we have incredibly good focus pullers on house that ended up throwing away all their conventional techniques, and we're going to go into detail about how they achieve focus, but basically they just guessed it by watching rehearsals and used devices such as the Marshall monitor, which is an incredible tool, all of which we're going to demonstrate over the next few days. But basically, anyway, we shot the Canon commercial. It was very happily received, and then I took that skill set onto house, and I started thinking, well, my goodness, this camera could be so useful for all kinds of things, like shooting inside cars or in confined areas. And then, lo and behold, we were just at the end of season 6, and we had a script that suddenly came up that was about, and I'm sorry to bore everyone to death because probably a lot of people know this story, but anyway, you're going to have it. It was a story about an industrial crane that had collapsed on top of a building, and the whole thing had basically sort of concertinaed down. And so a lot of our sets were kind of like literally this high. And, the very idea of using our reflex cameras and geared heads that weigh, together about 70, 80 pounds, and moving them around. The whole set was designed to kind of pull apart and the lid sort of lift off, but we would have still been shooting if we'd adopted that technique. And we had a director called Greg Utanis, who is our exec producer, and I said, well, why don't we try, shooting this on the 5D and let me do some tests. And he got very excited about it and was I didn't think he'd go for it because obviously compared to 35mm film, there is a big quality drop. Without a doubt, because, you know, we have compression, all of that stuff, and, you know, but he just thought it was a great idea, and we did tests, and again, we tried to punish the camera in every possible way to find out where the problems lay, and we ended up, first of all, thinking about shooting it for all the scenes where we were in very small areas, where we basically spent days on our hands and knees, and then there was a secondary collapse, and then we were on our bellies for a couple of days, and the 5D seemed to be the obvious choice because we could just move it around very easily and achieve incredible results, and also the ISO factor was kind of massive, being able to shoot in very low light levels and so on and so forth. So basically that's my intro to the 5D and how I came to fall in love with it. Ever since then, you know, we discovered a massive amount of things about it, such as you can squeeze 3 cameras into a tiny corner, and you can keep eye lines from actors much tighter, because when you use, you know, dollies and geared heads and 35mm cameras, the cameras tend to spread out, and so the tighter shot, the eye line might be quite close to the lens. You know, in the wider shot, you know, the eye line might be way off. I mean, you know, because of the bulk of large cameras and people filling up quite a large space. So, you know, all these kind of little benefits started sort of coming up. And then we also had this idea that apart from running A and B camera, which we always do on a TV show, it's very rare not to run 2 cameras. Often you run a wide shot first, but once you start coverage on a scene, you often, I mean, almost always run 2 or 3 cameras. We had this idea to just have a third roving cameraman that basically was up to his own devices, and we just said, just go and shoot beautiful shots. And do beautiful inserts, just grab beautiful shots, and you're on your own and you're not tethered, because as you know, probably everybody knows, when you shoot on TV, there's a whole bunch of people that want to see what you're shooting. I mean, like the director, the script supervisor, the writers, the producers, there's a whole area called Video Village.
It's kind of like this.
Yeah, it's kind of like this, yeah. And everybody wants to know, because they want to see how the performance was, and the writer will often say to the director, well, that wasn't quite my intent, or that was brilliant, or whatever it might be. Or, you know, the director might say, wasn't that bit out of focus? Or, you know, so it needs to be seen, and people rely on it very heavily on television to get through your day's work, basically. Because you obviously try to, on television, you have to move very fast. You have to shoot, on average, about 8 pages a day. That's not hanging around. You really have to move. So we are clocked on every single scene we do. We have to finish at a certain time. And as soon as you start getting behind schedule, then you feel this presence of producers that start to fill up Video Village, and they're sort of like that, and the pressure starts to build. And you know, they often say, you know, it's Gone with the Wind in the morning and Dukes of Hazzard in the afternoon on television, because it feels like that. You know, things are often very kind of gentle and nice, and then suddenly we all realize that we're 2 hours behind schedule, and we have to sort of go like crazies to get our schedule done that day within our allocated hours, because it costs a lot of money to do overtime and so on and so forth. So you know, so we still use the 5D for a lot of stuff. We use it for doing all our car interiors. We use it for any time you want to, you know, sort of get into confined areas, and it's faster to just get the camera up against the wall, because you know a 5D can be just this long, whereas an ARRI with a zoom is this long, and so you've suddenly made your set sort of 2 or 3 feet narrower, and you know, things like that. You know, and it's also much easier to just go and stick a monopod up there, or flip the old image stabilizer on and rest your hands on the wall, and you've got a great shot. And just recently, Rodney Charters, who's a good buddy and a fellow explorer of light with Canon, and will probably end up here shortly, I'm sure. He uses the 60D because it's got a swivelable viewfinder, so he can put a camera up on a wall and swivel the viewfinder and get a beautiful shot just like that without having to cut a hole in the wall or remove a wall. And you know, so there are so many uses for these cameras, and we use them all the time. And you know, this is just to show that we don't use them because they're cheap. They're just incredibly useful. And the one thing that, the reason I like the 5D more than the 7D and more than the 1D Mark IV is because it's got the largest sensor of all the cameras. And what that translates to mean is that used in the right way, it can give you the shallowest depth of field. The larger the sensor, the shallower depth of field. It's the same if you go from 35 to 2 1/4 to 4 by 5 to 8 by 10. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
What, the chip sizes?
Well, just just you know, depth, you know, the size of sensors. And
Yeah, so basically the 5D, the one reason that they use the 5D is because it's a full frame, so they can utilize all the beautiful primes that Canon has to offer. Because, like, I mean, it's 1.6 on the 7D. Not that it's a bad camera, but I mean, you lose a lot. It's what is it, 45% smaller than a 1D, 5D Mark II? 45%. So, I mean, it is cool though. I've had one. So, and then kind of like lost where I was.
Were you talking about the 1.6 crop frame and?
So the crop factors, because the 7D is a 1.6, the 1D Mark IV is a 1.3, which is not bad as well, but it still kind of like grabs it out and kind of pops it out. But I would definitely rather shoot with the 5D Mark II instead of.
Yeah, until the DSLRs, HD DSLRs started shooting video, the only option we had was camcorders, which were absolutely disgusting. I mean, everything from the dust on the front of the lens to infinity was in focus. I mean, it just looked horrible. And you know, the use of shallow depth of field is an incredibly important tool in filmmaking because it enables you to focus on, you know, get inside an actor's head. You can make everything around him just disappear and become a mush and become unimportant. It can save you a fortune in terms of art direction. You don't need to put the perfect patina on the wall behind an actor because you could basically just cover it in anything almost, and as long as you keep the light off it a little bit and defocus it, you can get away with a wall made of fish boxes. It wouldn't matter. You know, and this is how you can be really creative using shallow depth of field. You can really, so not only is it cheap to buy, rent, whatever, it's great to, you don't have film processing costs, you don't have, it's a very green thing. You don't have nasty chemicals from film processing, you know. But you can also keep your sets kind of limited. You can shoot in terribly simple sets and create illusion just by light. And this is one of the things I love. I mean, even on a 24, if you shoot at 1.2 or something like that, you're fairly close to an actor in the set on house. You know, we shoot most of our scripts in a hospital, and hospitals look pretty damn boring. I mean, they're not very interesting places to look at. They're sort of, you know, full of jangling architecture, which is distracting to the eye. And even on the 35, I mean, our fastest lenses on our ARRI system were you know, we could have had 1.3s, but we basically use Cook S4s, which are T2s, and but with any kind of wide-angle lens, you'd really see the background quite clearly, and unless you took the light off it and sort of made it less prominent, it was always still a distraction. So when it came to shooting the season finale, for example, we wanted to be inside Hugh Laurie's head, and we did that by shooting a massive amount of 1.2 and 1.4, and we even had that lens that makes the best of focus pullers quake at the knees, a 50mm T1, which has about depth of field of about a fly's eyeball. I mean, there is no depth of field. It's if you use it at T1, I mean, it's you can focus one eye and the other eye is completely out of focus, and you wouldn't even recognize an ear back here. It's so out of focus. So we use this to kind of as a tool, just like anything else, like dollying or tracking or all the other devices, composition, how to, lighting, all of the devices you use in film. Depth of field is very definitely a very important one of them, and that never existed until the DSLRs came around. So let's take some questions on what we've.
Yeah, I had a question. When you're shooting wide open like that, do you use a neutral density filter or polarizer, or just keep your lights very low?
That's a good question. I keep the lights very low in the set. There's something that we go into later is the native ISOs that Stephen will take everyone through, but I've always begged Canon if they'll give me a 10 ISO on their camera so that I could shoot as wide open as possible, even on exteriors, because even at 160 you find yourself shooting at 22 outside unless you put an ND on there. Luckily, most of episode, the season finale on season 6 was under my control. It was all, I was able to control it by lighting and just keeping the light levels down very low, and especially for those certain scenes. And controlling it by the ISO. I actually often broke one of my own rules, which is, and shot at 100 ISO, which gives you a tiny bit of noise, but I'm very lucky because I have a lot of help in post-production and a bit of noise reduction. Sort of got rid of that fairly easily. Can you do noise reduction in After Effects?
Yeah.
Does it do it?
Yeah, so you can do anything in After Effects.
Yeah.
But,
so
when you shoot with the NDs though, sometimes they'll give you a cast, depending on who makes them, like the coatings. Sometimes you'll get a weird magenta shift or something like that. You always got to be careful about drop-ins, all that stuff.
And it's also when you shoot with NDs. I mean, the thing that I really hate about shooting with NDs is when you go outside in a glaringly bright day and you get lots of little hits off chrome parts of cars or something like that, and they go straight through the filter, reflect off the front of the curved front element, bounce back onto the filter, and then you shoot them again, and they look absolutely horrible. And it's and I've been looking at the possibility of getting filters on the back of the lens, but it's pretty tricky with all the electrical connections and so on and so forth. So it's one thing that I would love. As we know, I mean, there's quite a few camcorders that have built-in NDs, and that would be great. But it's some people have invented map box systems where the filter ends up at 45 degrees, but then you have to have such a massive filter for coverage on a wide-angle lens that, you almost defeat the object of having a small camera, So I try to avoid NDs at all costs, and, but it's tough sometimes, Sometimes you have no choice, So where were we?
We're at questions.
Yeah, we were. Have we got any? Is everybody dead back there?
No, there's a lot of questions, Gale.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What do you mean when you say, you're talking about the 50 millimeter, what do you mean when you say T1?
Well, they made a lens till about 6 years ago, which was the fastest lens that Canon ever made, and it is actually a T1.
I think he means the difference between T and F.
Oh, sorry. The only difference between F, there isn't really a real difference between T and F. It's just that in film business, for some reason, we always talk in T-stops because it's actual transmission and it can vary. It means, an f-stop is the theoretical value of the aperture. The t-stop is the actual technical transmitted amount, and that can vary very, very slightly. Gotcha. It shouldn't, but sometimes it does. So it's just in the film biz, they always say that we always use t-stops,
Gotcha. So instead of the 1.2, there's actually a 1 out there somewhere?
It's horribly expensive,
Yeah,
and it's optically pretty rotten. But if you need that kind of light, I mean, it gives you another. Actually, what is the difference between 1 and 1.2? It's another half stop or something, isn't it? It's got to be.
I think it's a third.
Yeah, it's a third or something. But if you're shooting, even when you stop that lens down to 5.6, it's still optically not as good as the 1.2 or. I can't remember what stops that come in. There's a 50 mil. There's a 1.2, there's a 1.4 and a 1.8, isn't there? Yeah, I think so. So it's it's just great if you need that last little glimmer of light, and or you're actually sort of trying to drive your focus pullers insane, which is why I used it. And because everything I was trying to do on the finale was to make their lives hell.
Of course.
Having a very shallow depth of field, and they still love me. I didn't them coming back next season, so it can't have been that bad.
Gale, we have a question from the chat room from James Myers, who wanted to know if HD DSLR video will ever replace full-size film cameras, and why or why not?
Well, I think I would tend to. Actually, why didn't you take that one, Steve? That's a really good one for you.
I don't think it could replace it. I mean, seeing as like there's things like the Alexa out there, but I mean, it could definitely be comparable. So I think Canon's actually working on a 4K chip. They tested it. I think they showed it a year and a half ago. It was just kind of like a box, so it was like a concept. So I mean, pretty soon we'll see like 4K HDSLRs and stuff. But I think just because like the small things, they have a lot of restrictions. There's a lot of like IR and noise and compressions and stuff like that. So we kind of got to like work around those. So if they do replace it, it's not going to be for a little while.
And what was the Alexa camera that you talked about?
The Arri Alexa, that's what they shoot with on house.
Yeah, we're finally changing from film to digital, and digitally, in the digital world at the moment, there's basically the Genesis, which is a Panavision camera. There's a series of cameras from Red, who've been around for a few years, and just over about 18 months ago, actually about 2 years ago, Arriflex came out with something called the D21, and they just improved on it enormously by coming out with a new model about a year ago called the Alexa. And it's a pretty phenomenal camera. And it has, as far as I'm concerned, it has the same dynamic range as film, which is the first time that I've seen that, done my own tests. It's possible that Red do too, but I haven't tested that. So it's basically digital really is catching film, and so sadly the age of film is really sort of fairly limited now, because there's a point at which not enough people buy it, and then suddenly it all dies, and because the machinery doesn't work anymore, the economics don't work anymore. But so we're going to the Alexa, and it's a pretty amazing camera. But it works perfectly in conjunction with the 5D when we need the 5D for insert shots or car interiors or inserts. I mean, I said that. Or sort of using the very, very shallow depth of field because of the large sensor, because the sensor on the 5D is way bigger than the Alexa. The Alexa is just basically like a 16 16 by 9 frame, just as we had on motion picture film that ran vertically, and it's a 3-perf system to save film. So it's not a huge amount of film. It's probably, actually I can't remember the proportion. Is it, it's about double the real estate, isn't it? That's why I ask all these really difficult questions.
No, it is.
So you know, on the 5D, you've basically got about double the real estate that you're shooting on, and that translates into shallower depth of field and, you know, the stuff that I love.
And it's $50,000 just for the body.
Yeah. And then you start on the lenses, which are all 10 grand each.
Yeah, and then batteries and monitors and rigging, and then the airy head too is $3,500. That's just for the head. So, I mean, yeah, so $2,500 sounds pretty good after that.
Yeah. So, I think that's a really good point. I mean, you know, you've got that, which is like, by the time you've got your kit and your boxes and all of that, is like $500,000. And then you've got this, which, you know, as Steve said, you can make a movie for $500 in the weekend, over the weekend, you know, so.
It's cool because like when you're making all the films and stuff, like, because when I used to shoot a lot of like magazine editorial and all like, wanted to shoot on the P82 back, have 82 megapixel, but what for? I mean, you can do 8x10 ads with the 20D, you know, 8 megapixels. So I mean, you kind of got to use it for what you have. I mean, it's not that everybody's going to start shooting features immediately. So, I mean, Vimeo, your film will be seen immediately all the way around the world. You could never do that in the film industry. So I think it's kind of part of the revolution. That's what I like about it the most, is like everybody can see your work. And then when people see it and they like it, like Gale said, if you have the script to back it up, somebody will find you. So.
There's a, you know, I can't quote for real, but I heard something like the proportion of films submitted to Sundance this year was something like 25% that were shot on HD DSLRs, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. So it's this enabling of people that I think is really special. And
Hey, Steve. Can you just tell us, I mean, you have all this knowledge about all this camera gear. Can you just tell us where you learned all of this information?
I learned...
Did you go to school for this?
No.
Or this is all on hand?
Yeah. I pretty much started shooting when I was like 11. Like I had Kodak like brownie cameras, you know, shot stills, shot film for my whole life. Just always was picking up like Super 8 cameras and just kind of like wanting more. But I learned by like reverse engineering. Like I'll take what people have built and then kind of just dissect it and go backwards through it. But most of the time it was just Google, because I would run into errors. I'd be like, render error? What does that mean? So then I'd go into Final Cut, or I'd go into Google, and then I'd get on a Final Cut forum and I'd be like, I got render blue, and then some other guy had it, and then he didn't know how to fix it, and then I kind of just learned by the internet, and then just trial and error, and just kept going back and forth through stuff. But the one reason I started shooting though is because I used to be on a bunch of the AM teams for like snowboarding and stuff, and whenever I was hurt, I would sit on the sidelines and shoot. And then I kind of evolved into like extreme sports editorial stuff, and then eventually like picked up video, but then just kind of got back and forth and started retouching, and then from retouching I transitioned into After Effects, and then after you knew After Effects, like Final Cut and Premiere, they were just kind of really easy just because you were just cutting it up and there was no really compositing or coloring. So just kind of one of those kids that, like I said, like I always had to be a one-man team, because I was the only one of my friends that was like a film guy. Everybody else was like, yeah, I'm gonna go make money. And I was like, I'm gonna be a filmmaker. So, but I mean, I went to school for computer engineering, and so ended up being a filmmaker. So
you're self-taught?
Yeah, basically, after all that. So, but yeah, I mean, you can literally teach yourself anything if you have like the willpower to do it. Like I didn't go out, I mean, I don't smoke or drink or do any of that kind of stuff. I sit home, you know, I don't go anywhere on Friday night. Like I'm sitting there reading books and being certified and doing all that stuff. It just, I guess it's just your passion. It's just your drive to do it. I mean, if you have a big enough drive, you'll do it no matter what. I mean, because everybody else, they'll kind of just get over it, or they won't make enough money, or they just won't be starstruck or something like that, and they'll kind of fall off by default. But if you just keep going, like you'll eventually make it. So that's
Very
that's what I do.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, it's really cool to have you here, Steve, because we have, two very different perspectives of where
Right.
you are in your career versus where Gale is. So I
Yeah,
think it's
no, he-
really helpful for our audience.
It's really cool because when I first started like picking it up, I've worked with like a lot of people, and I just really liked the way he like explained composition and how he like evolved from like a filmmaker or from like a photographer into it, and he shot large format. And he got all his composition from like photography, and he's done traditional black and white like printing, and he got a lot of his lighting techniques by like shading in the darkroom and stuff, and like that's kind of how I like got into it. And I was just like, he just kind of thought a lot like, kind of the same as I did. So I eventually evolved into one of his classes, and then just kind of went from there.
And here you are.
Yeah. And now here I am on Creative Lab. And it's weird because I've seen every single one of these. Even
Really?
the pumpkin carving one, like I've watched them all. Yeah, I know. It was actually pretty awesome. I was like,
Jason Hoppy.
we bought all the tools and ours sucked and they broke, but it was still cool. So, but yeah, it actually worked out. But yeah, I never thought I would be sitting here actually teaching on Creative Lab. So it is actually really amazing to be here.